This video is the first of two to look at some functional idioms that are common in Python that make the code both more readable and more compact. So look at this code snippet here on the left. It's what you might call a loop and append construction. What's going on here? What is this code doing? What is new list going to look like after this code has run? Take a few moments to think about this and give the output to this little code snippet. The output to this code is going to be a list of numbers, starting from 0 and ending in 9, right? So we've created an empty list, new list, and then we're going to loop through a range of numbers, 0 to 9, and append each of those numbers to our list. So we will print it out. This is what we're going to get. We can do the same thing and get the same results in another construction, which is called list comprehension, and it's much more compact, and once you get used to it, I think it's more readable as well. And this is what it looks like. So we've got a new list, and we've got this one line of code, which is square brackets, so a list, and inside of that you have I for I in range 10. And if you print out the new list, you'll get the same result, a list of numbers 0 to 9. It's doing the same thing. The one on the right, list comprehension, is more functional. And it's got many of the same elements. So let's take a closer look at this. So in both, we've created a list variable. On the left, it's an empty list. On the other one, we've got the list variable, and then we have the square brackets, and there's something in that square bracket instead of being empty. And inside, we have two things. We've got this for loop, which is exactly the same, for I in range 10. And the other element that we have the same is this I, so the thing that's going to be added to the list. And on the left, it's in an append, and on the right, it's right there in front of our for loop, which is all of that is inside the list. And that's a list comprehension. It's a very compact way of creating a list of elements. And we can even add a condition. So just like you can have a for loop and then loop through it and then say, if something is true, then maybe add it to my list. We can do the same thing with the list comprehension. So this code right here is going to give us a list of numbers, even numbers 0 to 18. So we started out with the same thing that we had before, I for I in range, but here it's range 20. So it's giving us, it's looping through each element in a range of numbers from 0 to 19. And then we have an if statement that follows that. And notice there's no colons. You know, obviously there's no indenting or putting things on different lines. It's all here in one line. After the for loop is done, we have this if I modulo 2 equals 0. So in other words, if the number is 0. So divided by 2, it has a remainder of 0. It's even. So this is a good way to learn the syntax. This is a bit more complete syntax of our list than we saw on the previous slide. So let's go through this. So the first thing we have here is our output expression, the thing we want to be output into the list, that variable. Then after that, we have the loop, a for loop. And the for loop is using that same variable in it as its variable for I, which is also the same variable used for our output expression. And then it's going over something that must be an iterable. So a range of numbers produced by the range, or our list, or set or dictionary, which is, you know, generally always true for loop. That hasn't changed. And then after that, we have our if statement. So after the for loop, there's the condition that's going to tell us what's going to be coming out in our output expression and put into our list. Here's a more practical example of using the list comprehension. It's a very simple one. So we have a text here, and we have this code. So what is this code doing? Well, let's take a look at that. Now it's creating a list. We have our square brackets. We've got a list comprehension here. So let's just look at this closely. So we've got our output expression here. We've got our thing that's going to be left in the list. So W for W in my text split. And this is our iterable. It's going to be a list of words in our my text in that string. We split it into a list of words, and now we're iterating over it. So each time we iterate over, W is going to be, that W variable is going to be assigned the next word. So W, so the word for the word in our list of text, is going to be left in the list if the length of the word is 3. So in other words, this is going to give us a list of all the 3-letter words from our text if it works correctly. So we're going to get this. We have 4 3-letter words in our string, and that's what that list comprehension is doing. So it's working. It's got all these elements that we see in the loop and append that we're used to. It's just really written in a different way, and it's just, I think it's not really difficult to learn. It's a matter of kind of changing your way of thinking about it, the logic maybe of thinking about what it's doing. So I like to think of it as, instead of loop over and append, I'm think of it as like I'm creating a list, right? And I'm going to tell Python, okay, I want you to create a list, and I'm going to have elements in the list. That's my W. But I don't want all the elements. So loop over my text and leave behind in this list only the elements that have the length of 3. So only the words that are 3 letters long. So in my list, loop over each element in my list of words and only leave behind in my list those that have 3 letters. So it's just maybe a different way of thinking about it, but it's much more compact. It's actually more fun to write, I think, once you get used to it, and more readable, really. So there's less going on. We can also do if-else statements in list comprehension. So just like you can decide what and when you want using a condition, an if-else condition, we can do this on one line in the list comprehension. And in this case, what we're doing is we are saying even, so leave behind even in my list, that string even, if the element, so here we have I, so if I modulo 2 is 0, so if I is even, leave behind even, else leave behind odd, and that's for each I in a range of numbers from 0 to 9. So as it's loop over the range of numbers from 0 to 9, leave behind even in my list if the number is even, and odd if it's odd. And this is what we get out of that. So notice here, the only thing that's changed here, it's a little confusing, but when you add an else statement, the if is going to be before the loop instead of after it. So if you use only if, it's going to be different. If is going to come after the for loop, but if you use if else, it will become before the for loop. So a little back and forth there, confusion with the list comprehensions if you're using if else statements, but you can use if else statements and if statements in list comprehension. And notice also that the output expression doesn't have to be a variable. So it doesn't have to be that thing that we're looping over. So for I in range, it doesn't have to be I. It can be something completely different. So we can append whatever we want using list comprehensions, setting these conditions, or not setting the conditions. We could just say, give me, leave behind the string even for I in range 10. So we'd have a list of 9 strings of even. It could work that way as well if you didn't want the if or the else statement. We can also, it can be a string, it can be a variable, you can also put a tuple. So you can create a list of pretty much anything with our list comprehension. There's a lot of flexibility. So here we're creating, what are we saying here? Let's look at this, thinking about in the way we talk about list comprehension. So it's saying leave behind, well, maybe it's easier to start backwards. It's a little bit backwards. Let's start here. We're going to loop through a range of 10 numbers, 0 to 9. And as we loop over them, we're going in this list. I want you to leave behind in this list a tuple with 2 items. The first one is going to be that number, and the second one will be even if I modulo 2 is even. So if the number itself is even, otherwise leave behind a tuple with the first number and odd as the second item in the tuple. And we'll get this output. So 9 tuples. So this is list comprehension. It's an easy way to write lists. It's in one line. the way of thinking about it and syntax is slightly different, but it's much simpler, I think. And again, notice we've got if, we've got else, we've got the loop, we've got the thing that we want to append to the list, we've created the list with the square brackets, there's no separate lines, there's no indenting, there's no colons even, but we can do everything that we need to do to create a fairly complex list with some conditions